I have this quote at the beginning of the book. Some days the glass looks half empty, some days the glass looks half full, and some days we can see the beauty of the glass regardless of the mood state. And so one of my daily practices is to compassionately allow myself to see the glass as half empty when sometimes it does, not beat myself up because I don't get it right, but to know that there will be days that I will see the beauty of the glass regardless of the mood state. And when you see the beauty of the glass, it pushes you towards a better mood state. So I have all of these regular practices, and I'm deeply grateful that I have been exposed to these different approaches that allow me to sort of contain myself.
Hey there, I'm Dean Walker, founder of a little organization here in the interwebs called Living Resilience. And we've been providing transformative support and resources and practices to the collapse aware and collapse acceptant communities for just going on 10 years now. This is June of 2024 that I'm recording this. And this is a brief introduction to the second in what will likely be more than a year-long special focus series here in Living Resilience, in our online community space, and in our podcast, The Poetry of Predicament. The theme of this special focus series is really just an extension of the theme of this work for years now. We're putting a special focus on how do we redefine mental health when we're facing the human-caused collapse of both Earth and human systems. When we're in a clearly self-terminating system, this business as usual global culture that we find ourselves in and find ourselves saturated in since birth. And we find that it is based on lies and extraordinary, cruel, its foundation is set in things that are events and trends and ways of relating and ways of being disconnected from our core, the core elements that give us meaning and relationship in life. When we have been saturated since birth in that level of disconnection, and we've been also saturated in the lies that make it all believable, that bring us right to the table every single day to eat another helping of how can I be a consumer? How can I be compliant with this incredibly unfair, unequal, uh, ridiculously extinction-prone culture? So what we're wanting to do is to really pull apart those questions and really start to articulate the next level of questions that would have us do an inquiry, an in-depth inquiry into those foundational questions. How did we get ourselves here? How can we possibly recover any sense of center, both individually and collectively? How can we reconnect with other people? How can we reconnect with our own sense of inner home or center? How can we connect with soul? We seem to have been deeply disconnected from each of those elements. And this year and the special focus series of particularly podcast interviews is going to be very much like this one today, with the South African journalist whom I've already had an earlier conversation on almost identical topics about 5 years ago. There will be a link to that earlier conversation. It is my pleasure to be speaking today with Leonie Joubert, which you'll notice when you see Leonie's name spelled out. If you're familiar with French, it would be Joubert or something like that. In South Africa, that's how they pronounce it. And so Jou-bay, and that's Leonie Joubert. And I am thrilled that she is very much on board with the idea of being a repeat guest in this series. And for us to go on deep dives each time that she comes, that is a slightly different variant of our conversation prior. So I hope you find as much deep resonance and authenticity and generosity of spirit in how Leonie shares with us, not only from her newest book, which is called Invisible Ink. You know, she, of course, has been an environmental journalist for a long time, many years. And she is exposing for us the inner trials and tribulations of how to stay functioning in this extraordinary career choice of being an environmental journalist in these times, and to watch years and then decades go by in which not only does nothing positive show from all the work in journalism around the world, but by every conceivable measure, we have done nothing but increase the human-caused collapse of both Earth and human systems. And that's the corrosive irony and the corrosive, cynical nature of what Leonie and virtually every other person doing environmental journalism around the world has had to grapple with. How do we live with ourselves as human beings, knowing what we're doing? Again, I hope you find Leonie's extraordinary realness and generosity of her in-depth and vulnerable sharing, and not only, again, for the promotion of her book, which is wonderful. I'm hoping that it's a massive bestseller, but it's also to just be an exemplar of what's possible to be real, to find a sense of inner home and center as one is grappling with these elements, these corrosive and cynical elements. So again, I'm just thrilled to be offering you this first in 2024 conversation with Leonie Joubert from South Africa. All right, welcome everyone back to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I'm particularly pleased to introduce and welcome back Leonie. I couldn't remember well if it was 4 or 5 years ago approximately when we first and the only time we've spoken before, and I agree with you. It was a remarkable conversation, and I will include the link to that conversation in the show notes for this conversation today. Needless to say, a lot has happened since that last time, and we just spent a few minutes before hitting the record button to confirm that. And I'm just slowing down my speaking right now quite intentionally, and some people who watch this podcast a lot know that that's something that I do to cue my system, to settle my system, and to give myself more access to what the delightful Dr. Ian McGilchrist calls the implicit. I flag it differently than he does, but it basically, between my neck and my perineum, is where the stuff that's really worth remembering and worth living for occurs in our bodies. Certainly is what's so for me. And So by cueing my speaking, my breathing, my thinking follows right along, and it slows down, which I'm very thankful for. It is a joy to have you back. I, as I mentioned, I feel like I've had an advantage in being able to read the first few chapters of your book, which is online, and we'll talk about that. And I want to just unabashedly promote your book in today's conversation as a small part of what we're going to be doing. Yeah, it's life is requiring all the best skills I can muster from all the lineages that I've had the privilege of being a part of for my whole life, to stay at a relatively even keel in today's world. And we're going to talk about that. And that is, of course, the predominant feature of your book, which I really look forward to reading all the way through. You're releasing the chapters one at a time here. And I'm going to spare introducing you at length, and I'm hoping that you could just give us an encapsulated version of what got you into environmental journalism, which is where I discovered you a few years ago. I'm sorry, I've even forgotten the article, like what it was about. It didn't matter. I just knew I needed to contact you for an interview in this space. I'm wondering if you could just tell us about what got you into this space, and just a brief thread of through that time since you and I spoke last, uh, what drove you to write your book, and a few just essential nuggets so we can get a sense of what you wanted to include in your book, which, by the way, not to mention the words, the essence of the stories you're telling in the book, that is so classy. How it lays out, I've never experienced like an ebook that has that smooth operation. It's a good thing. Leonie, thank you so much for being here. And if you would take it from there to present yourself in any way you'd like and give us a little bit of introduction about yourself.
Thank you. Well, firstly, it's such a thrill and a delight to join you. This journey through storying the Anthropocene, storying the climate crisis, can be existentially lonely in a way that even being in the company of other people often can't quite soothe. So to be in conversation with someone who gets it is just soul edifying.
Yeah.
So for the listeners, the viewers, I'm a science writer based in Cape Town in South Africa. And I have been writing about the climate crisis in the African context for 20 years. And it's been an extraordinary privilege, and I've had extraordinary adventures. Um, I've written multiple books, lots and lots of journalism. I have had the extraordinary privilege of writing for National Geographic magazine, which has been an absolute career highlight. But, in the midst of all of this, Dean, when you and I met, it was in 2019,
Mm.
where you got hold of me because you read an article that I had written in the Daily Maverick, which is a very well-respected online newspaper here in South Africa. And it was a reflective piece on my own mental health difficulties after reporting on climate change for so many years. And it was because of that you and I had a conversation. And the context at the time, and then I'll talk about why this new book, then happened as a result. And the book is called Invisible Ink, Writing from the Edge of Extinction, because it is an outpouring of rage and despair and frustration at feeling like an invisible female writer in the invisible global south. And this book is very much memoir based, which is unusual because most of my writing is sort of third person, remote, sort of journalistic voice.
Mhm.
This one just leaps straight into
Yes,
the
it does.
first person narrating
Mhm.
of what it's like to live as a woman in this world when you're fighting against capitalism and patriarchy and climate collapse. But just to jump back to our 2019 conversation again, Dean and we spoke about just the difficulties of really being at the front line of reporting on climate and feeling like these stories are not getting heard. Since then, I mean, I was really battling in 2019. Since then, we had COVID happen. We had, COVID brought on many shapes and flavors of loneliness that humans had not really had to confront in a while. This realization that we don't address loneliness by having an intimate other, for instance, or a nuclear family. We're evolved as, social primates to have extended families, and our our hiking buddies give us a sense of connection. Our intimate other gives us a sense of connection. Our pet gives us a sense of connection. Being in nature gives us a sense of connection. And we need this very complex weaving together of experiences of love. And so much of the existential pain that many of us feel at the moment, and which really came through in COVID, is because we are disconnected from so many things,
Mhm.
so many relationships that are fundamental to our sense of well-being. So COVID happens, and then I have a series of very, very difficult work assignments, which I will talk about in subsequent chapters of the book. But it involved having an emergency extraction from northern Mozambique because there were some dangerous insurgents getting close by. There's a climate link to that. It involved getting dumped on the Angolan border by an angry witch hunter, because I broke open an investigation and
Mhm.
I had to get myself home after that. And again, this story will come through, but it speaks to. So the Namibia story is a really interesting reflection on the demonization of indigenous knowledge in Africa
Mhm.
by Western colonial Christian thinking. But of course, it involves a little bit of an adventure. So the storytelling is an opportunity to reflect on some very heavy philosophical stuff. So in the midst of all of these work adventures happening, um, for me, the climate truth bomb really hit. In spite of having spent 20 years writing about the climate crisis, I was in a sense of denial as well, about how serious it really was. And I went through a period of time where I realized that in the 50 years that I've been alive, so I was born in 1972, that is the year that the Club of Rome brought out its Limits to Growth report. And we were told 50 years ago that we can't continue with this limitless growth capitalism. And yet, in that period of time, more than half of the emissions that are driving climate collapse have been dumped into this kind of atmospheric sewer,
Yeah.
although we're treating the atmosphere like a sewer. And then I realized that I had been writing about this crisis for 20 years
Mhm.
with this kind of naive idea that I would be making things better, and actually things were getting worse.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, the United Nations, they brought out this report called Global Warming of 1.5 degrees, and they were basically saying we've got 10 years to pull the handbrake.
Mhm.
And I just thought, that's 10 birthdays. That's 130 full moons. If my entire career as a writer has not achieved much, how am I going to achieve anything in 10 years? And I don't want this to sound like a narcissistic reflection, but it was, when you put your lifetime down as a reference point,
Yeah.
it brought on an existential overwhelm. It just broke my brain, the thought that, why do I get out of bed every day? And it took me a very, very, very long time in the midst of the loneliness of this journey.
Yes.
And as Dean, as you read in the first chapter, I lost my life partner to immigration, because that was his climate resilience strategy. And losing my intimate other was deeply heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So all of this resulted in a collapse that I ended up in hospital for a while.
Yeah.
But what has been extraordinary about this journey is that it's been an opportunity to reflect on how society came to be where we are today. This book, Invisible Ink, it's very memoir based. It draws on my own stories because storytelling is a very powerful way to move people. You know, we're going to move people with stories of the heart rather than facts of the head. So that's what these stories are about. But at the same time, there's something so profoundly universal in my own experience, of losing my partner, of feeling like I've lost my role in society because I don't feel like I'm being heard or that I'm being effective, because that's what, you know, humans are meaning-making animals. We, um, I'm jumping all over the place, so please just rein me in. But, you know, part of the Western narrative that got us into this predicament is that we are selfish and competitive loners, that we're individualistic and we're struggling for limited resources. And that is a lie. We are evolved to be gentle and caring and cooperative
Mhm.
and to work
Right.
together. I mean, that's how we survived as hunter-gatherers. And so what I've realized in the last 3 years is how lonely I am because of the world that we live in.
Mhm.
But what I have learned well is how to reconnect. What I'm learning, should I say, is how to reconnect. And I'm trying to use storytelling as my own medicine because it's helping me process. But at the same time, the stories in this book are a way for me to move beyond the hopelessness and despair that landed me in hospital. It's a way to take the anger that I feel towards the system that is oppressing so many and causing so much suffering,
Mhm.
and to have a sense of agency. And in that agency, there's a powerful thing happening there.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for that. As a rich recap of the threads that I was asking for, and then just weaving them into this tapestry that started for me in my experience of you and me in conversation in that first interview. And I so appreciate you reminding me, because I had not yet reviewed that earlier interview, and I'd forgotten that this was exactly the focus that I reached out to find you again. This is now the focus of my entire little organization, this living resilience thing that I do. So it could not be more relevant. And in fact, I can't quantify how it has expanded as a core issue for humanity. This is literally the core of our downfall. This is the core of human caused collapse of both earth systems and human systems, is our disconnection. And the primary way of this disconnection to show up is in our mental health, is in our ability to relate with one another, to actually have relationship with earth, with other people, with ourselves. So it's just stunning to me how much overlap. And I love the extraordinary flair that you bring. It's you know, art, very much a work of art. Again, the literally just the form of the book, and then to weave in the stories that, truthfully, I'm quite tired of the commodification of the human processing, the ways that we operate. If I hear the word neuroscience one more time, I think I'm going to just scream. What what makes the stories alive and truly does make it a part of our inner workings that I hear you speaking about in this introduction is how much we share of ourselves. There's a generosity of spirit in how you've written this book, for instance, and even how you've introduced yourself that allows me to feel welcome in your world. And it certainly makes me want to welcome you into mine. So let's just use this as a threshold of you are now officially introduced to this round of people watching this interview. We're current. And so shall we just go at it? I would love it if you would kind of leapfrog back and forth between what you're seeing in the world, what you're concerned about in the world, and particularly what inspires you in this world. You know, I'm not interested in just having long doom scrolling, hard ass conversations. I'm very much interested in being real at every step of the way. But please do share that which still inspires you and still makes you want to be connected and be a part of a community or part of a type of expression in the world. So yeah, I'm excited for wherever we're going to go in these remaining time in this interview. And just one last thing that I'd like to see us leapfrog back and forth to. Part of why I've wanted to speak with you is to include you in a list of experts of some kind or another, or important voices, or people with some gravitas or some traction with regard to that kind of realness in presencing yourselves in the world. This project that I am putting together here in Living Resilience is to, for the next year and a half or so, I'm guessing, you know, it could go longer, I don't know, is to have a number of regular guests who themselves bring a theme that's related to the mental health. What is it to redefine mental health in these times? I say that it has not been well defined for a long time. And that's why I've chosen not to become a therapist for, you know, literally every year since I was about 20, I thought about being a therapist. And every single time I've looked, it's been no, because that's not the function, the role that I have interest in playing. That is to get people back to normal from a mentally disturbed or disrupted space back to normal so they can function in their bullshit jobs or function in dysfunctional relationships. No, thank you. And so now it's rather unfair summary of relationships and jobs that I've just said. It's now worse than ever. And it promises to go exponential with AI and so on. We're looking at a very different world. So I would be absolutely honored if you would be one of the regular guests and speakers and presenters in this series to explore what is it to define, what is it to discover, what is robust mental health facing a global predicament, and to do so in a real way, not in a doom scrolling nihilistic way, but actually how can we affectionately integrate the nihilism that's a natural part of this process so that it can diffuse itself and be integrated into a robust a felt sense of mental wellness, not to mention relational wellness, in the face of humanity's greatest, most challenging predicament. So that was far more of a commercial than I thought. There we go. So, so with all of that said, Is there any particular thread you'd like to just launch into?
Yes.
Well, please do.
Yeah. Ready?
Anytime.
There are so many threads I could pick up on, but I think maybe to keep it short and tight. So I would say that I'm coming out of a 4-year period of very challenging health. How I am managing my mental health is through, I'm taking some medication. I see a therapist regularly. I make sure that I have all sorts of little daily tweaks, which I'm sure you and many of your community are aware of. You know, the daily tweaks, whether it's meditation, flow state, creativity, moving in nature, connecting with others, you know, all these sort of careful mindfulness practices where you massage your thoughts so that you can move yourself into more robust states of being. I have this quote at the beginning of the book. Some days the glass looks half empty, some days the glass looks half full, and some days we can see the beauty of the glass regardless of the mood state. And so one of my daily practices is to compassionately allow myself to see the glass as half empty when sometimes it does, you know, not beat myself up because I don't get it right, but to know that there will be days that I will see the beauty of the glass regardless of the mood state. And when you see the beauty of the glass, it pushes you towards a better mood state. So I have all of these regular practices, and I'm deeply grateful that I have been exposed to these different approaches that allow me to sort of contain myself. But the mental or the sort of philosophical backbone that I'm leaning on now is Viktor Frankl, you know, when he survived Auschwitz and the death camps, he wrote this extraordinary book called Man's Search for Meaning, which I'm sure many of you have encountered. And it's just a beautiful reflection on what we are as humans. We are meaning-making animals. We look for meaning. And of course, what he noticed in his time in the death camps was the individuals who were able to somehow find meaning within the suffering were psychologically more resilient. And if we can work with that, with trying to find meaning in the suffering, we can find strength. But then Albert Camus, the French existential philosopher and novelist, he comes up with a second important part to that. And I'm sure many of you were picked up on the fact that his incredible novel, The Plague, it had a resurgence during COVID. And it's an extraordinary book. I mean, when you read this novel, it's almost as if he traveled forward in time, lived through the COVID lockdown, and then went back in time and wrote the novel. But the take-home message from The Plague is he says, okay, so if you can't even find meaning within all of this extraordinary suffering, you've got two options. You can either end your life, or you can embrace the absurdity of the suffering. And within embracing the absurdity, you then put yourself in service of others. And why do you do that? Well, because it's the right thing to do. And this is literally what gets me out of bed every day, is whether I have 1 year left to be effective on this planet or 20 years, I am embracing the absurdity of the suffering. I accept that I'm not going to be able to change any of the system. I may not be able to slow climate collapse, but I can do something every single day that is in service of alleviating others' suffering. And that's what I'm trying to do. And it probably sounds like I've got a little bit of a God complex. Maybe I do, but it drags me out of my own navel-gazing self-pity. And it reminds me that I can be effective as part of a community. And so how am I effective? I can't darn socks. I can't mend pipes. I'm a terrible cook, but I can tell stories. So that's where all of my energy goes, and
Uh,
I feel like I've thrown myself into storytelling, and this book in particular, to the exclusion of all else. So my day is connecting with my cats, going onto the mountain to try and decompress, and sit and just write stories. And writing the stories in Invisible Ink has been incredible. It's been cathartic. It is rewarding because it's creative, but it's creative storytelling, but it also pulls together these really complex global forces that have got us into this mess. So it's trying to bring all of these things together. So it's so challenging at an intellectual and creative, and it feels meaningful. And I think that is really important. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do with Invisible Ink through the storytelling process is, for me, it's incredibly rewarding because it's creative at a storytelling level. It's challenging intellectually because you're pulling together all of these complex global forces that got us into this mess. But at the same time, it feels like it is in service of helping others feel like they're part of something. Storytelling is an interesting thing. It's a very ancient technology, if one wants to frame it as a technology. We have used storytelling to connect, to exchange ideas, to come to social agreements around certain things. We've used storytelling to beat the plowshare into sword and go to war. We have used storytelling to beat the sword into plowshare and to go to peace. Storytelling is a very powerful way to connect with others and to build social cohesion. And I think for me, that's why storytelling feels so important. It's the one thing that I can do, that I can contribute, that is about trying to allow people to feel they're part of a community. It's a way for me to feel less alone. I feel like if I can get these stories out of myself,
mhm.
I can let people see who I really am and connect with that. I mean, just you and I having this exchange is a way of storytelling that is good for the mental health.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing, I don't know if you want to jump in with another question now, but I mean, there's all sorts of places I could go to.
Yeah. I would like to just loop back to one sentence fragment you included in the past few minutes. You made a comment like, well, this might sound like I have a bit of a God complex, when you were specifically first time mentioning your commitment to be of service to those you love.
Mm.
And I have found that to be kind of a common comment, almost so, to not appear too self-important, perhaps. I don't want to guess what your motivation was to say that, but that's often what the motivation is, because you're not the only person I've heard say that. And I just would like to give us a break here, you and I, and anyone else who finds themselves at this particular part of the path of being a concerned, caring human being facing the most challenging circumstances in human history. That once we come to a place of acceptance of, yeah, you know what, this is happening. This is happening. And we will see extraordinarily large, inarguable evidence of it happening within our lifetime. It could mean billions of people displaced and possibly dying. The scale is extraordinary. And so this is one of those mental health threads I was asking us to weave over these 18 months or whatever. And that is to find a place in daily living where we can make sense of, how do I participate in daily life, knowing what I know, having come to this grounded realization of what this is, what's going on. How do I find a place in myself that is still feels like home in which I don't have to be freaking out. I don't have to have some massive disruption in my well-being each day. I can find a place, and the words that I use are, I can expand my capacity to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors in the name of being of service to those I love. And that's it. That's, in a nutshell, what I've come down to as that motivation to get out of bed every day. And while I do find myself having activist motivations and ideas and supporting others and so on, I have really come to a place of abandoning all intended outcome. I have no attachment to outcome whatsoever, because it looks to me like we've made that choice. That's why I called my book, of 2017, The Impossible Conversation. And I think I just shared with you before we got going that I've been collapse acceptant since I was 15 years old, which is 125 years ago. And it's a remarkable place to get to allow for this is really happening. I'm waking up into this day, and how can I find meaning and connection, relationship, intimacy, even in the face of the most horrifying human chapter. And so I wanted to just ease up on what could be considered a kind of a self-judgment about, have I got a God complex? No, I just have a complex of wanting to be of service to those I love. So thanks for sitting through all that. I didn't realize I would quite go down the rabbit hole that deep, but that's the kind of element that in the first interview that we had together, and now even more so, I find that there's a tremendous amount of resonance in this way. So again, thanks. I'm done. And I know that you had a number of other threads that you would like to pursue, unless you'd like to respond to what I was just saying.
Well, there's so many lovely things to respond to. I think what is interesting from the perspective of a writer is that writing can be a very ego-driven pursuit. And I mean, you just need to look at the trend of influencers on social media to see how that is an aspect of the human condition that can quite easily subsume one. The glory that one gets from being popular. And, even in activist spaces and in spiritual pursuit places, people who rise up the ranks might easily have their ego inflated by the power that they have because they're seen as a guru or an excellent writer or whatever. And I think the opportunity there is to, I think constant self-reflection. Am I letting my ego get too big? I don't think there's any harm in doing that, but you mentioned something about the attachment to outcome, and South Africa, I'm sure many of you know, we had an apartheid government. So this was a white minority, autocratic, deeply racist, extractive government for nearly 50 years that regarded anyone of color as a second-class citizen. And the 1980s were a particularly hot period of time in political activism. And I really look forward to sharing that aspect of South African history with you through the book, which is going to come out in the next chapter. Because in many respects, South Africa is a microcosm of what has happened globally. 300 years or 400 years of imperial exploitation, colonial expansion, extraction, these profoundly racist, extractive values and value systems that regarded nature and people of color and women as less than and therefore ownable and exploitable. And South Africa, in that 50 years of separate development, where essentially we took those racist values and we took the ideology of white nationalism and we codified it into a law that we called apartheid, separate development, a state of being apart. And we used that in a profoundly brutal way. Apartheid was regarded as a crime against humanity. So South Africa, and then now we have a huge divide between rich and poor. So South Africans may be equal before the law. We may all have the right to vote, but people who come from a white privileged background are still white and are still privileged. And, so this is one of the, sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I'm trying to use the South African experience as a way of showing that this is kind of the global North, global South divide.
Yes.
And the point is that in the 1980s, that was a very politically hot period of time. International sanctions were beginning to make itself felt on the country. We were an international pariah, but locally the activists were getting up day after day after day in extremely difficult and extremely dangerous situations to fight against this oppressive state. And when I speak to those old school activists now and I say, what kept you going? And they say, we were not attached to an outcome.
Yeah.
We didn't know that we would tear down the national party state. We did it every single day because it was the right thing to do. And I really think there is a profound lesson to be drawn from that. We may not be able to upend this extractive capitalist system overnight. We may not be able to upend it at all. But we don't do this because we're attached to an outcome. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And even in that, there is a huge amount of meaning. What I also wanted to say, Dean, in response to your, I mean, I'm amazed that you have been collapse aware since you were such a young human and that you have not gone mad. I mean, one of the things I say very clearly in Invisible Ink is this is me going mad and being absolutely sane as I watch myself do so.
Yes.
And I'm a mature adult and I have the climate truth bomb hits, when I have skills to cope,
Yes.
I think to draw on your experience, Dean, and maybe this is what we need to do as a community, is that you come to this, you have a sense of responsibility, given that you have learned skills to cope with the existential overwhelm of being collapse aware. Other people are going to start having these truth bombs hit, and it's going to be profoundly unsettling. And we know you may not be able to catch everyone. I may not be able to catch everyone.
Yeah.
But together we can catch a few. And the two experiences that I want to draw on. I think the first is when I was having my own big collapse. I had a number of experiences where I was in what was supposed to be safe spaces, and I expressed to people how bad the situation was, and I was either gaslit or shut down. So one was in a retreat context where a Buddhist nun basically shut me down. She said, it's not nearly that bad. There was this huge pile-on. I felt completely gaslit, and it was existentially lonely in a way that is hard to describe. When you're feeling that distraught, that overwhelmed, even if you're wrong, it doesn't matter. That is how you are feeling. And in order to help the person process that is not to try and fix them, not to tell them that it's not that bad, not to tell them chin up, just let them express how they're feeling. I've also had a psychiatrist suggest to me that I might be a little bit psychotic, because I've blown this thing out of proportion. Again, existentially lonely. You go to a medical person for help and they say, It's not that bad. So the next experience that I had very recently, and I'm profoundly grateful to the couple that created this space. It's a couple that do this healing in nature trauma work. And they gifted me a retreat with a whole bunch of people, very kind of exclusive retreat.
Mm.
And in that space, I was able to express to everyone how bad the situation feels. And I said to them, I feel like I'm going mad because I feel as though I am this person standing on top of a roof in a village, and I can see a tsunami is coming towards us. And
Mm.
I'm shouting, shouting, and shouting over the rooftops to run, run for safety, run for safety. There's danger coming. But my tongue has been ripped out. So nothing comes out of my mouth. And the frustration and desperation, like everything around me is about to be crushed by this tsunami, and there's nothing I can do because no one's listening because I can't get words out. And I said, it feels like the top of my head is going to explode with
Mhm.
desperation. And what they did when I showed them how mad I'm going is they didn't try and fix me. They didn't try and say it's not that bad. They didn't say it's going to be okay. They just let me say how painful it was. And to be seen in that space, to be allowed to show them the rawness of this pain was profoundly, profoundly healing.
Mm.
And if there's one thing that I take away from that whole experience about how we go forward every single day as we see more and more people feeling this way, is to just give them a safe space to say, oh my actual God, I'm terrified.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, beautiful.
There
What
is
you've
another
just,
lovely story.
sorry, go ahead.
There's another lovely story I would like to tell. And I mean, this is told from the position of someone with incredible privilege, where
Mm.
I'm allowed to access nature spaces in a way that many other people can't. But one of my assignments for National Geographic was I had to do something on the kelp forests around South Africa.
Mhm.
And I had never paid attention to the ocean or the kelp forests. And I had to almost overnight learn how to become a scuba diver and a free diver. But the process was like walking through a portal into a different universe.
Mhm.
Literally, 20 meters from the tide line, I would descend into a world where there are these completely otherworldly creatures. So a gas flame nudibranch, Google that. It's the most extraordinary. I mean, to call it a sea slug is really just an insult because this thing, it looks like a psychedelic fur coat. It's got these little wavy things on its back, which are essentially its lungs. The water moves through these little wavy things and they absorb oxygen from the ocean. Beautiful colors. I mean, it's just mesmerizing. You would think you were on a psychedelic watching this. But so doing this assignment for National Geographic, but it opened my eyes to a universe that I didn't know existed. And the one thing that when I come out of the water, besides the fact that, your vagus nerve is kind of cryogenically frozen because the water is so cold and your nervous system is completely settled from this rhythmic breathing and the flow state movement.
Mhm.
But the thing that struck me the most about experiencing this world is how few people get to see it. And the profound sense of responsibility that for those few who are able to see that, they need to come back from that and tell stories of wonder and awe about those creatures with others who will never get to see them, because that is how we create a nature awakening. And if you think back to that fantastic photograph, Earth Rising, that
Yes.
was taken from the Apollo 8 in 1967, I think it was. I think that's one of the most important photographs or images of our species history because
Yes.
it captures that moment that astronauts say they experience when they leave Earth's atmosphere and
Mm.
they turn back and they see this precious little ball floating in space. And they realize that this is our only hope, the home. And what is profound about that photograph is it taps into the many different ways that we can bring about this overview effect, a collective overview effect. Storytelling is how we do it. You know, whether it's a powerful image of a nudibranch under the water that no one is ever going to see, or whether it's a picture of Earth in space, or whether it's a photograph capturing in a moment when a kingfisher slams into the water, and the water, you know, these are moments that show us the awe and majesty of nature around us. Just walking through a forest, pausing to hear the frog song and the bird song and the wind speaking as it rustles the trees. All of these are opportunities for nature awakening and an overview effect. And these experiences are available to every one of us if we pause and kind of deliberately do it. So my experience of encountering these extraordinary life forms underwater have, again, heightened my sense of responsibility to share those stories with others. If they're never going to get into the water and see a nudibranch themselves, then let me show them. And they will realize that these little sea slugs are their kith and kin, as are so many other species out there. And to come back to this idea of the social tipping point, which I'm sure you have encountered, this idea that if we can just touch enough people, we can get an idea to go from fringe to mainstream, and then have the social force. And apparently it's just 25, you just need to touch 25% of the people within your spheres of influence in order to reach these social tipping points. And whether it's, you know, civil rights, animal rights, you know, climate justice, whatever it is. If you think about it, 25%, that's 1 in 4. That's 1 in 4 people within your social circle. So if we can every day somehow touch the heart of 1 in 4 people, slowly over time, we will pull together a collective. And this may not be in time to slow the collapse, but we can support each other through the pain of the collapse. And I think that's where Albert Camus comes in, you know. We put ourselves in service of others. Yeah.
Yes. So I've made a little list while you were speaking of ways that either I have experienced in myself, in my own practices, or others in the more experiential practice groups that are a part of my body of work with living resilience, and or exemplars. You know, I'd make a point of searching far and wide for exemplars, people who have found a way to have an extraordinary way of having their type of creativity be at the core of their inspiration, their relatedness, their way of curating meaning in their lives. So just the brief version of the list, you know, you mentioned a number of them a number of minutes back: creativity, activism, awe and wonder, reconnection with deeper self, other people, earth, and soul, and qualities of attention and relatedness. I know that sounds a little bit repetitive, but something I've found is in just trying to find a new definition of agency. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a curmudgeon about the use of the word agency in anything but the most personal or intimate or familial or very nearby community, that anything larger than that, I think, is delusional for people to get involved with, thinking they're going to change the world, save the world. But these qualities of attention and relatedness, there's a part of my work that's a bit controversial because it's unusual. I'm asserting not only that we would be well served by reclaiming our center, that we've actually had our center taken from us, and or we've forfeited it to be able to fit into this culture. That's just the way it's set up, is strip us of our center so that we are compliant. We're compliant with the lot, living in a lie. Because how else do you control people in a lie? So at the level of agency of our own inner choices, our own ability to reclaim center, there are there are a few qualities of kind of inner capacities that, if we can spend some time building these, expanding them in our own embodied experience, we can truly become more and more effective at being of service to those we love. Which, again, I'm just looping back to what we both have said in different ways. That's something worth getting out of bed in the morning for. So we do that through, yeah, sorry.
No, do you want to finish your thought?
I do, with regard to just those two pieces. One is the qualities of attention, and the other is relatedness. And the controversial part that I was just mentioning was that I'm asserting that ours is not just reclaiming physical center like a gymnast or a martial artist or a dancer, but we actually have a number of core components of this remarkable, miraculous thing we call us, our body, that actually includes a number of other bodies, if you will. It's an unusual way to talk about it, but for instance, we have a mental body, and reclaiming center in the mental body could be called sense making. You know, that's a fairly popular term these days. And you get a sense that we actually could curate a sense of center in our mental body, which I would say was obliterated during the pandemic when I watched just wildly insane ways of relating and having, not conversations, just yelling at one another. Immense cruelty, all put into a blender and whipped up into some frothy, just extraordinarily corrosive replacement for sense making, or for having, again, having no center. And the same thing could be said for attention and relatedness. And I think that I'm just going to make a short note here, because we will have a number of these episodic conversations over these coming months. And especially we will focus on the work of Ian McGilchrist, who just has some incredible golden nuggets in his extensive body of work, in which he articulates what got us into this. How could it be seen individually and collectively that we've become so out of balance that we are literally self-terminating? That's a conversation worth exploring as far as I'm concerned. And he does make a few stops that are really worth joining him in. One of them is the qualities of our attention in each of the two hemispheres that we all have. And the other is relationship. And again, he just has an extraordinarily clear and potent way of describing how relationship actually lives as an attribute of the universe. So he wouldn't quite call it that, but literally, he's asserting that relatedness, relationship, precedes the two items or people or subjects that would want to relate. Now, that might sound a little abstract and like, what the hell is Dean talking about? But he is asserting through years of extensive research of how we process and how we relate with this world, that there is actually an ambient atmospheric called relationship that precedes all of our concepts about relationship. That is how core it is that we have a direct felt sense of how connected we are, and how I can just imagine then the cost of our disconnection. So thank you for joining me on that little loop through a part of the rabbit hole. It will be laid out in further detail and much more clearly in later episodes.
So I will definitely go and read up on McGilchrist's work so that I am able to understand the framing.
Yeah.
I would like to respond with another important aspect of the book, which is still going to come through, which I hope speaks practically to demonstrate what happens when othering results in broken relationship. And this is going to be a part of the book that I think is going to be most controversial. But, you know, a lot of the book is about looking at the othering of people of color, the othering of people who hold indigenous knowledge, the othering of women. And essentially, this is the result of, you know, generations of patriarchy. And we're now facing an extinction level event. So, you know, we need to be a little bit frank about the power structures and the power dynamics at play here. So one important aspect of this book is specifically writing from the perspective of being a woman in a patriarchal world, where the male gaze is a very powerful tool for keeping people in their place and reinforcing these old power dynamics. So, so I'm speaking very practically now to the resulting broken relationship, which comes from the othering, which comes from this artificial hierarchy, the caste system, with men at the top, you know, going down, and how that dehumanizes the other and allows us to then justify dominating, exploiting, and even terminating the other. And, you know, books like the fantastic writers like Amitav Ghosh, who wrote The Nutmeg's Curse, and Jeremy Lent, Patterns of Meaning, and his main book, just gone blank, the Patterning Instinct, Patterning Instinct, and the Web of you know, they just show so clearly this continuum of, you know, the othering of people in different ways, and then the othering of nature, and how that results in exploitation and extraction. So a very long-winded run-up to one of the chapters in my book is written from the perspective of being a menopausal woman. Now, this is not about, you know, comedic stories about hot flashes and, you know, bloating waistlines. Although it is written in a way that is very self-deprecating and quite funny, because a spoonful of medicine a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. But through all of the trauma of the last few years, I've also had to go through menopause. And, you know, I think it's not spoken about because it's seen as not a terribly relevant thing. But 50% of the people on this planet who are lucky enough to make it to the age of 50 will go through what is essentially a neurological event. This isn't just about, you know, hormones and mood fluctuations. Brain function physically changes for women for a period of time. One aspect of the brain literally shrinks for a time. And this results in difficulties with memory, memory fog, incredible fatigue. It results in, I mean, if you imagine that you spent your whole life driving a car with a 6-cylinder diesel engine, and then suddenly one day you wake up and you find there's a lawnmower engine under the hood. That is what it's like to be a menopausal woman. You have been so potent for so many years, you felt unstoppable, and then suddenly you can barely function. Um, and of course, this isn't spoken about because, it's just seen as a woman's issue. But a woman drop out of the workplace, they have massive self-esteem loss, they lose money because they can't work, so they become economically and politically even less powerful than they were to start with. So, one aspect of the book is writing from, oh, sorry, and then of course there's another very important thing, this old-fashioned bigotry that still exists today, and you can see it in the publishing industry data. This idea that women are not as authoritative as men. I mean, I hate to even say that this is still the case, but men are regarded as authorities and automatically assumed to be competent, and women have to prove their authority again and again. And there's a fantastic book by the author Marianne Sigert. She's a British journalist and writer. And it's called The Authority Gap, Why Men Are Still Taken More Seriously Than Women and What We Can Do About It. And what is maddening, but also fires me up with righteous indignation, is that she pulls together the evidence that supports what so many women know intuitively and have experienced, that they are not the content of their brain is not taken as seriously because it is a brain that is connected to a body with a uterus, and so imagine this from my perspective as a competent writer with an important message to tell. And I know that my stories are going to be read less widely because I'm not a man. How maddening and frustrating that is. So one chapter explores that, but it explores this from a very important perspective that we are in a planetary emergency. 50% of the brains on this planet are marginalized because they are women's voices. This is incorrigible. We cannot allow this to continue. So the wonderful thing about menopause is many menopausal women will say this. If I may swear, you can edit this out. Women who reach menopause say they have no more fucks left to give. And this honestly is what happens. Women realize that they don't have to perform to the male gaze. They don't have to play by the rules of the patriarchal system. They can actually be incredibly potent and powerful by pushing back, but they are punished for it. Women are taught that if you play by the rules of the game, you will get rewarded in this way and given social currency in this way. If you don't play by the rules, you get benched, if that's the correct kind of sporting term.
Sure.
And women who menopause, they realize people can try and bench them, but it's not going to happen. So the voice that I'm bringing to this book is a voice of fury that I refuse to be rendered silent because I'm a female writer. And I know that this is going to upset a lot of people because I'm very frank about how I just refuse to tolerate this anymore.
Yeah. I am so moved by this last piece that you've just offered. I am starved for the rage. There are so many different flavors of that rage. You've just articulated one for half the world's population. Extraordinary. Leonie, I think our envelope for this particular conversation is drawing to a close. I can't imagine a more powerful teaser, if you will, for the next chapters that you'll be offering out from your book, both you know, and all the links will be in the show notes for how to connect with your book and the different ways that people can, and for our future conversations where each time we'll grab a theme or two. And I'm really praying and intending that this will be a theme that hopefully we will revisit many times in this series. This is the most challenging and extraordinary chapter in human history, and it is encased in and caused by primarily the kind of disconnection and coupled with patriarchy and all the different structures that have been molded into form. And I can't imagine a more important thread to continue here in the exploration of what it is it to have robust mental health in the face of this predicament, than how to just first start with naming and then start to explore what's possible in the authentic and real-time expression of some of that rage, exploration of what is it to be half of this world's population and to be so long suppressed. And you know, I'm just I'm literally on the edge of my seat right now in anticipation of these conversations. So I'm just wanting to recap. You've shared with us a number of the little core gold nuggets from your book, from your own personal history in especially an extraordinarily difficult profession to be in these times for a number of reasons. And I also would like to just thank you so much for your generosity of personal sharing. You know, that is what it just seems to open up doors in every direction when each of us finds a way to just share that which matters most in our experience, which is often vulnerable. And you know, I can certainly have my moments of fear when I'm getting ready to do that kind of sharing. So thank you for each of those ways that you've shared with us today. And I'm curious if there's anything that you'd like to share with folks as they begin the journey with us in this exploration of what is it to redefine mental health, or how can we define for ourselves what is the inner work of collapse, what is the inner work of these times. And I'm curious if you would have anything that you would like to share as we complete this particular episode.
I mean, it's there's so many things to say, but I think this book is about love. This book is essentially about love. It explores the pain of losing love, and by that I mean our connection with the planet, our connection with nature, our connection with each other. Losing those connections is a loss of love. It's heartbreak. I mean, each one of us knows what it is like to lose a lover, an intimate other, a very close family member. The loss of attachment creates pain in one's body that is physical. You know, it's called heartbreak for a reason. And so many of the stories that come through in this book are about heartbreak at different levels. And where am I going with this? It's just a reminder, you know, that we all want love. And by that, I don't just mean a partner.
Yes.
So the conversation that you and I are having is about love. You know, it is about allowing each of us to see each other and connect. I experience profound love when I arrive home and my cat runs to the door meowing and purring because she's so happy to see me. Um, I feel profound love when I meet the cashier in the shop and she makes eye contact with me and smiles. These are all little expressions of love. And in the context of climate collapse, um, you and I spoke about this earlier, we need to think global,
Mhm.
but we can act local. And acting local is about reconnecting. It is about finding love, expressing love, these little things that we can do. So for me, in addition to writing this book and telling these stories, I'm framing all of this around the 1 in 4. If I can just reach 1 in 4 people today,
Mm.
I will have a sense of agency, and it might slowly create a fever of goodwill. And for all of the people who are watching and engaging with this now, each one of us, each one of us has a point of leverage within our worlds. When we talk about agency, it is one of those kind of generic words that loses its meaning after a while, but it's about having choice and decision-making power within
Mm.
our sphere of orbit, within our sphere of influence. Can I choose to eat this food or that food? Can I choose how to use my time or not? Do I feel a sense of overwhelm and powerlessness because I can't do X, but I can do Y? Do I feel jealousy because I can't and someone else can? How do I process all of these feelings? Um, so I think what is really important for mental well-being within the context where you can feel overwhelmed and powerless is to find the points where you do have agency. So for me, today I spent a lot of time connecting with colleagues saying, here's this basket of stories that I think are important and will help create a nature awakening and help other people feel seen in the context of the overwhelm. Please, will you share this widely? Let's share these stories. So that was me trying to find agency within my day. And I think if each of us can figure out where our agency is and claim that, I think it
Mhm.
can be quite an empowering thing. And out of that sense of empowerment comes a sense of well-being. But I think it comes back in the end to relationship and being with people and feeling like we are part of community.
Yes.
It's how we evolve to be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this first of hopefully many rounds of exploration of the inner work of collapse. And I can't wait for the coming chapters in your book. Was there something more?
Sorry, I just wanted to say one last thing, and I know this is possibly the most difficult thing in a day-to-day experience, is that the inner work, it involves bravery and courage, and it
Mhm.
involves developing a capacity to sit with the discomfort. And I think this is maybe where the Joanna Macy work comes in.
There we go.
I mean, as I'm sitting here, I can feel the whole inside of my sternum feels as though there's this cloud of sulfuric acid there, and it's like condensing against my chest cavity and it's burning. And for me, because of how my nervous system is wired, this is my daily experience. And for me, the most healthy way to deal with that discomfort is to get lots of exercise. It burns off the cortisol and settles my
Mhm.
nervous system. But,
Mhm.
when one confronts this kind of chronic stress of the climate overwhelm, it can cause physical discomfort. And it's very easy to run to self-soothe in unhelpful ways.
Yes.
So it's useful to learn helpful, healthy ways to self-soothe. And that's been key. I mean, I stopped alcohol 2 years ago because it was really an unhelpful self-soothing.
Yes.
That was one of my interventions.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, again, this is just the first of many uh, episodes of our conversations, and I'm hoping to also put together panels, and you would be so appropriate and strong in a number of the panels that I'm imagining, uh, where we'll have particular themes and one of the most important, as those who are in my living resilience world know, that I have a very strong emphasis on personal practices, that unless this is embodied, it just really doesn't stand a chance in the environment that we're in. And what I believe you were just talking about is how we can embody the possibility that we've been talking about. So, Leonie, thank you so much for spending this time. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in another episode of The Poetry of Predicament. This podcast is produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance. Living Resilience exists to offer transformative support and resources to the collapse-aware and collapse-acceptant communities around the world. Our sole purpose is to curate and offer coaching, support groups, courses, and events that assist people in expanding their core skills, competencies, and capacities for facing a troubled, predicament-laden, yet still ineffably miraculous world.